I heard the crash with my mug halfway to my lips, metal on ice, a sound like the world hiccuping. And for a half second, I thought some kid had finally learned how to drive. Then I saw the Lexus wedged against my garage door, and I understood, no, this was adult chaos, and it had my name on it. That was the morning everything in Whispering Pines went from quiet suburban hum to full-blown drawn-out soap opera. My name's Brandon Lewis. I'm an IT consultant who mostly lives in hoodies and Wi-Fi. And I've been in this house long enough to know every creak in the floor. Beaverton gets storms sometimes, but that ice, it laid the whole neighborhood flat for 3 days. I was at my kitchen window watching the news on one screen and checking a server log on the other when the car slid down like it was auditioning for a stunt reel and settled into the bottom of my driveway with a thump that made the whole house shiver. The driver stepped out like she owned the weather. Cream coat, leather gloves, that precise haircut that announces someone who knows rules for a living. And then I saw the vanity plate, and my stomach went cold. Patricia Hendricks, our HOA, president of 8 years. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with one of those people, you know how a conversation with them begins with a citation already typed in their head. She stood on my ice-slick driveway and told me flat as winter light that I needed to call a tow truck. I asked if she was all right. She waved off the question like it was an annoyance, and then, because of course she did, she started to measure my life against the HOA handbook. Your mailbox needs attention, she said, like a curator noting a blot on an otherwise worthy exhibit. Your lawn is a 1/4 inch too long in spots. All while her SUV was pushing a dent into my garage like a slow-motion penknife. Here's the thing you learn fast in these small wars, that people only reveal themselves when they're cornered. Patricia had slid into my garage because the street had become a greased slide. That's not always someone's failing, but she didn't take responsibility. Instead, she blamed my driveway. She tried off the cuff to turn the accident into evidence that my property was in imminent danger. She wanted a tow billed to me. She wanted fines ticking like a metronome. She wanted to be right. I called the only tow company I trusted. Pete's Towing took photos, logged the weather report, and offered Patricia shelter and coffee while we waited. She came inside and accepted the mug like a queen tolerating peasants, and then proceeded to make herself comfortable enough to inspect my throw pillows for infractions. 20 minutes later, the tow guy arrived, winched her out with professional care, and handed Patricia a bill for $250. She told the driver in front of me to bill me. When I laughed, because what else do you do when the absurdity is this thick, she flushed, dug out her card, and paid, then informed me in a tone that suggested judicial precedent that I'd soon be receiving an HOA citation demanding remediation of my unsafe driveway. 3 days later, the envelope arrived on HOA letterhead. Multiple violations, including dramatically the driveway slope. Pay the towing fee, pay fines, correct the driveway, or face daily penalties. It read like an ultimatum, and I felt the old familiar coil of anger and exhaustion tighten in my chest. This wasn't the first time Patricia had singled me out. There had been notices about paint, a bird feeder, a trash can that got a ticket even on collection day, but this felt different. This felt vindictive. So I did the grown-up thing I'd been avoiding. I called a lawyer. Robert Martinez, sharp suit, sharper tongue, told me what I suspected. This is retaliatory, he said. She hit your garage, then weaponized her position. He filed the initial responses, sent Patricia's insurance the claim for the garage door, and asked me for everything: photos, dates, witnesses, the whole messy trail. And then the story tilted. When Robert requested documents and asked to convene the HOA board, something I hadn't expected happened. Other people showed up. At the emergency meeting, neighbors came with their own stacks of petty notices and bizarre memories of patrols and policing by committee. A wreath on Robert's door, a hopscotch chalk court threatened with fines, a man fined for a holiday light display. It was like peeling back wallpaper and finding crudely taped rulings of a queen who'd been ruling by whim. The vice president, the treasurer, people who'd been on the board quietly for years, they found there was no record of systematic enforcement until Patricia started filing complaints against certain neighbors. That meeting ended with a decisive vote: rescind the violations against me, require board approval, before Patricia could send out unilateral notices. And for the first time in a long time, the HOA was reminded that rules are for everybody, not a power play for one. But people like Patricia don't bow out gracefully. She hired a personal attorney and filed a new demand, claiming my driveway had lured her SUV like some attractive nuisance. I swear this is a phrase they pulled from a legal Halloween prop. Meanwhile, the city building inspector, apparently prompted by a complaint, came out, measured the concrete, checked the joints, and verified what common sense already knew: the driveway was original to the house built in the late 90s, perfectly within code. That inspector, a stocky man with a dry smile named Tom, confided between clipboard checks that he'd seen a pile of complaints, all from the same woman. When Robert filed suit for harassment and abuse of authority, we were no longer alone. A handful of neighbors joined us with their grievances, and the pattern became undeniable. Here's the twist, and there's always one if you hang around long enough for justice to find its footing. While we were fighting over towing fees and violation notices, Patricia was allegedly fabricating a different sort of trouble. False police reports, claims of threats that never happened, a narrative she tried to spin that made her the victim. The county detective on the case called me to verify I'd never phoned threats to her. I wasn't the only one. The police dug in and found email drafts, never sent phone logs that didn't match the story evidence that pointed not to harassment, but to a pattern of contrivance. The court hearing was the day the whole neighborhood leaned in. I'll never forget Judge Kowalski's blunt way of cutting through excuses. She asked Patricia point blank whether she'd demanded I pay her tow, whether she'd filed violations only after the accident. Her lawyer stammered. She pressed on. The judge denied Patricia's motion to dismiss. The case moved forward. In the end, because sometimes even small towns have a backbone, Patricia resigned and the settlement paid my legal fees, and later faced criminal charges for filing false police reports. She was convicted, given probation and community service, and the restraining orders meant she had to communicate through counsel if she wanted anything to do with Whispering Pines ever again. They put the house on the market. They moved away. The HOA elected a new president who actually read the bylaws, and more importantly remembered that community isn't about policing every leaf and mailbox, it's about being human. What surprised me wasn't the court paperwork or the check from insurance that took the edge off the garage repair. It was the way people shifted. Neighbors who had been quiet or cowed began to show up at meetings, ask questions, and say out loud, "No more." We organized snow shoveling after a later storm, shared a potluck idea that actually became a spring thing, and let kids build snowmen on the very driveway that had once been a grievance. The regraded or not regraded, I still don't know, and frankly don't care, piece of concrete became a symbol of standing up, of ordinary folks deciding they weren't going to be run over. If there's a lesson, and I promised you one that doesn't preach, it's this: systems exist to serve people, not the other way around. Power left unchecked will always find a way to feel righteous while being cruel. And so sometimes the smallest act, taking a photo, calling a lawyer, showing up at a meeting, is the thing that interrupts a long, slow pattern of abuse. That's not some grand revolution, it's just neighbors deciding to treat one another like neighbors again. We got our yard back. My garage door is fixed. The HOA rules were clarified. The petty enforcement policies were reined in. And for the first winter in a long time, the community did what neighborhoods are supposed to do: help each other shovel a driveway, hand over a thermos of hot chocolate, laugh when a kid's snowman leans a little sideways. It felt like justice, yeah, not the vengeful kind, but the cleaning out the closet kind that leaves the place smelling less musty. So here's the question I'd leave you with, and I want to hear your take. When someone in a small community abuses a badge of authority, do you fight them publicly and risk the messy fallout, or do you quietly comply to keep peace at home? Is standing up worth the time and stress it costs? Tell me which side you'd pick, and if you've ever had to choose. If this hit a nerve, share your story in the comments. I want to read them. Was I stubborn? Maybe. Was I tired of being the only one who refused to fold? Definitely. But in the end, standing up didn't just fix a garage door, it reminded a whole neighborhood how to be neighbors again.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.